Thank you guys for attending today. I'll be spending the next 5 to 7 minutes speaking to you about digitalization, technology trends, accelerators, and making tax digital. Sorry, we can move to the first slide. Thank you. On the first slide, you'll see that we have a selection of countries I've picked. They're both EU and non-EU countries there that have already digitalized to a high degree their tax infrastructures. And what I wanted to do was just pick on a few of the key features of digitalization introduced by these countries. So if I take Malaysia first, Malaysia was the first country to insist that the VAT return data had to be generated from the business's accounting platform and submitted in a predefined format, including transactional data. They specifically legislated that the data could not be manipulated before submission. And this effectively ruled out the use of spreadsheets, although you could use a tax engine as long as it was integrated into the accounting system. Now, Malaysia introduced this when they introduced GST some years ago now. And what I find really interesting about Malaysia, when I look at the particularly the initial papers that HMRC released around MTD and their perception of how it would work from a VAT perspective, there are some very, very strong similarities between the Malaysian approach and what HMRC ultimately wanted to achieve. If I take Turkey, Turkey was one of the first countries to introduce a unique reference number that had to be generated before issuing an invoice. So effectively the sale was logged with the Turkish tax authorities before the sale had been made. And a little bit more recently, India incorporating all of those characteristics of the Malaysian model that I described. When they introduced GST, they now require businesses to match their purchase invoices to the supplier's output tax declaration before they can claim a deduction of input VAT. So this requires timely submission of transactional data by businesses, but it effectively stops a leakage of revenue for Treasury due to non-declaration of tax or fraud. And then if we look at the EU countries, you know, we look at Hungary and they've introduced real-time reporting. We have Spain that have an intermediate reporting, so effectively a transactional report twice a week in addition to the VAT declarations. And there are a number of countries in the EU that already have a standard audit file for tax. So they're delivering transactional data either on a monthly or quarterly or an annual basis. But hopefully what this demonstrates is a direction of travel as far as automation and digitalization is concerned. We're seeing more and more countries adopt a technology-led reporting process. And the adoption seems to be accelerating quite a bit. So, you know, when we're looking at sort of global trends, we can see a lot of these actually started in the non-EU countries who have newer regimes that they've introduced more recently. And we're seeing with the European countries, the UK included, that we're looking across at those countries, and you know, we have a more established indirect tax system, and the EU countries are now going through a process trying to upgrade the reporting process and to make it more digital in essence. So if we can move to the next slide, please. I think COVID-19, it's had a profound impact on everyone, and it's difficult at the moment to not mention it at all, because it does have a significant impact. I think we all sort of know about the impact, and I won't dwell too long on this topic. But you know, the safety measures, the lockdown measures, the restrictions, you know, that we have faced in the UK and indeed globally, they've essentially increase the adoption of digital services. And to a large extent, it seems that people, businesses, governments, they're seeing the benefits of doing so. And secondly, COVID has led to an increase in spending by governments, and eventually tax revenue is likely to play a significant role in post-COVID. You know, there seems to be a school of thought amongst tax administrations that making the administration of tax digital will increase compliance, ultimately reduce errors, and reduce the tax gap. And this brings us to where are we with this in the UK, and particularly making tax digital. And as mentioned before, the tax administration see digitalisation as a way of increasing tax revenue by closing the tax gap. This being the difference between the amount of tax they expect to collect and the tax they actually collect. And in 2017-18, when the decision was actually made to focus on VAT as the first tax stream to be subject to making tax digital provisions, the tax gap at the time was estimated to be in the region of 35 billion. And 9 billion of that was attributed to VAT. And interestingly, 6 billion of that was due to a failure to take reasonable care. And by that, we're talking about transposition errors, you know, an error in the accounting system, a human error. And it was felt that MTD would resolve this issue. So with that background in mind, what does MTD actually involve? Well, the first requirement is a requirement to keep records in a digital format. And I expect that most organizations are relatively comfortable with this aspect. You know, having an accounting platform of some type is quite common. This doesn't necessarily mean that every invoice needs to be held electronically, although again, trends suggest that that's where businesses are going with this. The second requirement is the submission of VAT returns using a third-party software via an API link, and you know, this requirement is now in force if you meet the thresholds, and so hopefully most businesses are now complying with this requirement. But the last element of making tax digital, and probably the most challenging one, is establishing a digital link throughout the VAT records, right through to submission. And this has been quite a difficult task or a challenging task for businesses. And I'll cover the challenges in a moment. What I want to do first is just touch on the benefits. You know, what benefits does this create for businesses? Sorry, could we move to the next slide? And as far as HMRC are concerned, they saw three fairly significant benefits, and I think those benefits are probably mirrored globally by various tax administrations. But the first one was to enhance effectiveness by providing increased transparency and accuracy of tax reporting. So, you know, governments and HMRC felt that by putting in place requirements that focus businesses to create more transparency, they would be able to audit and review transactions far easier, and therefore report accurate details as part of their tax reporting. It would help to identify fraudulent transactions chains quicker as well. You know, missing trader fraud for HMRC has been an ongoing battle and a problem for a number of years now. I was last with HMRC over 15 years ago as an officer there, and it's just a bigger issue now as it was back then. And most importantly, the MTD process would result in the right amount of tax being paid at the right time. That's always been HMRC's motto. Again, going back years, is that they want to collect the right amount of tax at the right time. The second benefit HMRC felt for businesses is that it improved services by providing a validation at the point of submission upload. It decreased processing time, so more automated your process is, and then more digital it is, then the processing time would be decreased. And by creating a digital portal for the tax, it would give access to other services. So businesses would be able to monitor more effectively their tax account and eventually receive tax correspondence in a timely manner through that account as well. And lastly, tax authorities felt that making tax digital would reduce the compliance burden by significantly reducing the preparation time. And I think that comes hand in hand with the automation. But it also reduces the scope of human error. And again, we go back to the 6 billion that's attributable to errors where there was a failure to take reasonable care. And HMRC felt that MTD will improve the quality of the audit trail. So it makes it far more efficient and easier to audit a trader and carry out an inspection. But overall, MTD seems to make sense, has a number of advantages, but the transition also represents some challenges. And the biggest challenge is the use of spreadsheets, key to organizations, but can be prone to errors. What we're hearing from businesses is that accounting platforms are not usually configured to deal exclusively with VAT requirements, and spreadsheets are used to undertake complex procedures as part of the VAT reporting. And so automating those spreadsheets can be a challenging process, especially when you're trying to do that through Excel. Even where businesses have managed to drive automation in their VAT preparation and reporting process by using those features that are potentially available in Excel and making sure that they have the necessary digital links, there are still further challenges that they face with keeping up to date with changing legislation. Creating a template or a process in a particular way, and then there's a change in legislation. You sort of almost have to go back to a drawing board, not quite to the beginning, but there is some change that's needed to those templates. And there are other challenges around sort of trying to automate Excel spreadsheets or other more manual procedures that are carried out in-house. These revolve around data quality, analytics, how adjustments are carried out, correction of errors, how these can be circled back into the accounting platform, particularly when you've already closed for month end or quarter end. It can become a bit of a big list, and but I'll pause here and I'll hand back to Akil and Tax Systems team, who can hopefully offer a solution or at least an option to consider when dealing with these types of challenges.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you for that. It's really useful, and it's quite useful to see the global trends that HMRC are almost modelling their models off. So, as you saw there, a lot of different jurisdictions are way more advanced, in the cycle as to the digitalisation element that HMRC are trying to get to. And to say that we're far off wouldn't be an exaggeration. However, it's clear what steps HMRC will be taking. And in essence, now is the perfect time to really get those points in place to make sure that you are future-proofing for those further developments that HMRC will look to. So first off, if we take a bit of a step back in terms of looking at different organisations that maybe have had some issues or have had some thoughts that may be similar to yourselves when you're thinking about this whole journey to digitalisation. And first off is looking at the time that's spent when we come to preparing VAT returns. And to be honest with you, a lot from that compliance effort is spent on the data collection, as Kamal mentioned there. Spreadsheets play such a big part in the day-to-day running from a VAT perspective. The problem you get there is that you might be bogged down by the data side of it as opposed to the tax analysis side of it, the tax technical. So a big point that we've seen in those companies that we've spoken to is that a lot of the effort is spent on the data side as opposed to really, the value add stuff when it comes to it. But on the other side of that, and I guess a bit more of a positive point, is this is the opportunity to digitalize the process. This is the opportunity to automate a lot of the stuff that you may be currently doing manually. And again, from our discussion with a lot of different companies, it's something that's been on the radar. However, MTD is now pushing that. So from the perspective, it is making sure you're complying with what HMRC wants to see. But while the changes are taking place, it seems like the perfect opportunity to really automate the process, really digitalize where possible to increase the efficiency in your current processes. And again, another thing that we've seen with a lot of companies that we've spoken to is there are concerns. So for example, one that we see is the manual adjustment element, something that within Excel is such an easy thing to do, something that can be done for a lot of different adjustments that may be needed. However, with that phase 2 digital link element, which comes into play from April next year, that is something that will break the digital link, meaning you aren't complying with what HMRC want to see and what they want you to do. So there are concerns within current processes from the data perspective all the way through to 9-box submission. And that's something that we are looking to, get rid of those concerns. And again, automate the process, make it more efficient where we are getting rid of those concerns as well. And finally, something that we mentioned as well is that HMRC are on a journey at the moment. That digital link element will not be the end of it. There will be future phases. There will be future taxes that are brought into play. But at the moment, it's just the VAT that we've got to go off. But it will not finish there. There will be future phases for VAT. There will be corporation tax and income tax that are already brought digital as well. And so what can we do? Essentially, what can you do that will get rid of those issues, that will get rid of those concerns and make sure that, you are doing the most efficient thing that you can? And that's where we think the digital compliance platform comes into it. And in essence, what really is that? It's something that will be able to give you control from transaction level all the way through to submission. Something that will allow you to actually see how you've got from your transaction level through to your 9-box return. And also give you, the visibility over what HMRC want you to see in terms of your payments and liabilities, your obligations and that sort of thing. And it seems probably a bit minor, but it is a big point to have that visibility over what HMRC are expecting and what you're preparing to. Also on the calculations point, so a platform that can actually deal with those calculations, something that doesn't require you to rely on Excel. Taking the dependency away from spreadsheets is a big thing that HMRC have continuously mentioned. They're aware that they can't remove spreadsheets completely due to the fact that so many organizations are reliant on that. However, taking the dependency away from that is something that they're wanting and encouraging organizations to do. And around the tax legislative side, a compliance platform will be able to deal with that to ensure that that onus is taken away from you, and that's within the platform itself to ensure that it stays up to date with any changes that are brought into the play. And also the risk element, as you mentioned, and as Kamal mentioned earlier in terms of the slides, that phase 1 was a simple change to how you submit your returns. The process of how you get there was completely fine, but that's due to that 6.4 billion of the tax gap that's been attributed to failing to take reasonable care in HMRC's own words. So reducing the risk is a big thing there, which the compliance platform can deal with, which we'll take a look at when we see the run through of the example itself. And so something that I'm mentioning, and you're probably hearing a lot in different places, is automation. But in essence, what does automation do? How does that help you in your current process? And the first thing, as we've mentioned there, so much time is spent on the data. So the data quality is where automation can help you, ensuring that any errors are picked up, ensuring that anomalies are checked over, and ensuring the data that you're bringing in to the platform is, accurate. Because if you're bringing in dirty data, it will pull out dirty data as well. So it allows you to really make sure that the data that you're bringing in is accurate, is that it's the correct data, and doesn't require you to check it all offline. It allows the platform to do that itself. And that's where some of the features that we'll look at will come into it, around the data analytics side, around the audit trails that HMRC are needing to see to show you how you've got from A to B, and also automating those calculations, which we'll take a look at. And something that we've spoken to a lot of organisations and something we're hearing continuously is that tax is becoming more autonomous. So, reducing that dependency on IT teams to build in the solution to what you're currently using, having something that sits outside of that, but does the same thing to more detail in terms of automating that process. And again, automation is there in order to help you future-proof yourself for future requirements around MTD, whether it's future phases for VAT, whether it's the jump into corporation tax and income tax. But that is something that HMRC have been keen to get across, that there will be many more changes coming into play. The pandemic that we've gone through has almost has delayed it. However, it was there before and it will be thereafter in terms of what HMRC are wanting organisations to do. So from our predictions on what we're expecting MTD really to do and what maybe HMRC's goal behind it is, and there are challenges that come with that. And the challenge is that you're going to have to prove your workings. And I guess a lot of that is done anyway at the moment in current processes, but there will be a lot more looking into it and HMRC wanting organisations to have that transparency. Again, the challenge there is around the data side of it and actually, processing and cleansing the data to make sure it's bringing in what it should be and that it is the clean data. And what we see MTD doing, and almost as a standard, is giving you the functionality to look for any of those, for example, duplicates, look for any of those out of period transactions, and actually look into your data and ensure that what you are bringing in is the correct data by applying those checks, which we'll take a look at when we run through the example. From a finance team perspective, and the way you're currently doing things, is that, as we've said again, Excel is the big driver here. I think HMRC statistics that they brought out said around 98% of UK-based organisations are using Excel. I think the only surprise there is what the other 2% may be using, because if you're not using Excel, it's strange to think what you might be doing your calculations on. But, finance teams will be wanting a solution in place that will help you take away that onus on Excel, but also give you the view of your business, give you the view of cash flow, for example, and allow you to really make those business decisions by automating the process and actually have, for example, this period-on-period comparisons, allowing you to look into the data and actually see where are those anomalies, where are the trends in our company. And as I mentioned then, going further into that is really allowing you to highlight those anomalies and do the trend analysis that HMRC will do on their side anyway when they are looking into businesses, but allowing you to do that beforehand. So looking at all those features, what are we offering as software vendors at this position to make sure, one, that you are complying with HMRC's regulations, but two, also, how are we helping you in your current process? How are we making it more efficient? And that's through the AlphaVac compliance engine that we have put together and that we are enhancing. And what does that include? What are we doing there? Well, the digital links are there within the software. The audit trails are there within the software. It addresses the issues that you may have around manual adjustments or manual processes, because it will allow you to do so within the software itself without breaking the digital link. But also, as I mentioned, the data being the big part, the software allowing you to apply your checks, apply that within the software and automate a lot of the calculations. But again, a big point, dealing with future complexities as it states there, whether that's legislative changes, whether that's enhancement requirements, or whether that's, changes to your VAT structure going forward. Having a software that future-proofs you to allow you to, focus on the points that you need to and automate those processes that can be automated. So that will bring me nicely onto running through an example demonstration at very high level, of which you can, of which we can, if helpful, show you a specific example for yourself that will actually, be a bit more tailored to your organisation. But in essence, what I'm going to do is show you an example run through as to how the compliance portal and the compliance engine that we're talking about can assist you through MTD and further. So the solution itself being cloud-based, I'm just going to log in. And again, in current times, that is something that can be quite useful due to the fact that everyone has the remote working ability, meaning that having that central point of where you can access the software is a big thing to allow you to get through those IT issues that may currently be faced with on-premise solutions, for example. And what we're going to do here then is run through an example single entity. And what you'll see here is, as it logs me onto my page, is where we've got our entity and where we're pulling down the details directly from HMRC's business tax account to ensure that the preparers that you're working to, that what you're preparing is in line with what HMRC are expecting on their side. And as we mentioned before, the phase 1 element being the simple 9-box submission, which you may know, which you may not be aware of. We have a solution titled Alpha Bridge, which is hosted on the same portal. But what we're looking at here is the full preparation, calculation, management, and even submission through the software itself to ensure you are doing what HMRC want from phase 2 and beyond. And now the first step is selecting the relevant calculation options, and the software is flexible enough to deal with different types of companies, whether it be a partial exemption in place, whether it be fully recoverable. But in essence, the process will be similar. So I'm just going to run through a standard method example here. However, those that may have a special method or that are fully recoverable, a lot of this will still apply to you in terms of how you bring in your data, how you get the digital links, and how you run your return. With the next step being to upload the relevant data sets that you're currently taking down from your ERP systems in order to upload to the software. So in order to bring in that detail, it's a simple exercise of exporting the reports from your finance to your ERP system. And the reports that you are exporting are those that will contribute to your 9-box return at the end of it. So you'll see here, for example, I've got a purchase ledger, a sales ledger, but these reports can be your AP reports, your AR reports, VAT transaction documents. Essentially what you're uploading here, any files that will contribute to your 9-box return at the end of it. And from the digital link requirement, in order to comply, a simple download from an ERP system and then upload into software, as I've just done there, does fully constitute a digital link in HMRC's eyes. The only time that digital link is broken, obviously, is when if someone takes the file offline from the ERP system, goes into it and starts to do some manual manipulation at that point, is when the digital link is broken. However, as you've seen there, the download from ERP, uploading to the software does fully constitute a digital link. You'll see the audit trail that comes through with that also. And what we can do at this stage is we can drill into those files. The software is expecting these files to come in all different types of formats and data headings and narratives and that sort of thing. So you won't have to fiddle with that beforehand. There's no set template. This will bring in your data as it looks, to which it will allow you to search through your data as you need to and apply certain treatment. As you'll see here, we have options to block or exclude certain transactions depending on what they are. Now, something the software will do automatically as part of that data challenge that we've seen with a lot of organizations is it will run some standard checks. So first off, it will look for any potential duplicated transactions. It will then look for any potential out of period transactions, looking at the period that you're working to, as well as using the date column. And the final thing is it will look for any transactions that have an unexpected VAT rate based on the VAT element that pulls through. Software will run those as soon as you upload any files, and it will pull out those transactions into exception reports. So meaning that you don't have to do a review offline of Excel. You don't have to do a line-by-line review of the data. The software will pick those transactions up that it feels like you need to look into in a bit more detail, and it will then run through the check on all the other data. So rather than you having to check line by line, the software will just pick up those that you need to look into and apply treatment to. We'll see those reports that run, but the next step then, which will make a bit more sense as we work through the calculation, is I'm applying tags to these files. And that comes down to the automation point. What we're doing as part of implementing the software, automating the calculation, building up a template so you don't have to go through the same thing each period. And the next step then brings me onto the mapping side. And now this mapping element is essentially telling the software where to pull the relevant details from the files that you've uploaded in order to make sure that their return runs accurately. So first off, we'll see the files that we've uploaded. And what we're then doing is we're simply mapping up the column headers from the data set that you uploaded to the predefined headers within the software. So you'll see here, for example, where I've matched up our net and VAT column headings to the predefined headers in the software. Reason being, when we run the return, the software will then know, okay, this is where the net numbers are collated, this is where the VAT figures are entered within the data sets. So it's essentially training up the software so it knows where to pull out the relevant points of information. This process isn't something that you'll have to do as users. This is something that can be managed by professional services team of tax systems. This is something that could potentially be managed by BDO as advisors. That's something that we can delve into. However, the way that this is designed isn't for users to do this. This is for us to have the insight of, apply, and then hand the template over to you. So our ideal scenario, by the time you start to use the software, the calculation has been automated in what we're seeing here. Now, I appreciate that this is probably looking at detail or data that may not be as detailed as yours, but it's just to give you a feel of what it is that needs to be done in order to have the software running accurately in the background and ensuring that we can run the 9-box return, that we can automate the calculation and make sure that it runs through as it should do. So once we've done that, in terms of the column headings, we can then continue with the next step of the calculation. And this is where we look to automate a lot of the adjustments that you may currently make in Excel. We're looking to automate that in the software, again, with this one-off mapping process that you yourselves won't have to go through. And what we're doing here is we're looking at certain things from a standard method partial exemption perspective. And again, I appreciate if you haven't got standard method partial exemption, this will look a bit different. However, the process will stay the same. So first off, if I look into my taxable sales, what I'm doing here is I'm essentially informing the software to pick up those taxable sales from the sales ledger file that I've uploaded, and will then apply a filter using a unique identifier in your data set. In my example, we're using the allocation of the tax code, and the T1 tax code representing, in my example, the 20% standard rated taxable sales. Now, again, this is specific to my data. What we do as part of implementation is look into your workbooks, look into those identifiers, apply them at this point. But as I mentioned, what this is doing, one-off process, automating the calculation, so you don't have to do the same thing in your spreadsheets each quarter. The software will remember the mapping, and essentially you'll get to a point where it's just a requirement of uploading your files. The mapping is already there to run the calculation and then do your checks and your reviews at the end of it. If I look from a purchases perspective, this time using the purchase ledger, but again, using a unique identifier in my transaction files to pull out where the taxable, exempt and residual purchases are. Where you may have things like reverse charges, that's exactly a scenario where we look to automate where possible in order to make sure the software picks up those calculations from your workbooks. Otherwise, what we've then done, we've uploaded our files, we've informed the software where to pick up the relevant transaction items and how to run the return in the background. But as I mentioned, that's a one-off process. That template will be saved to then hand it over to you. So by the time you come to use the software, it'll be a simple exercise of uploading your new files and running in the background. But as I mentioned, main aim here is ensuring that that process that we've gone through has the audit trail, meaning that the digital link isn't broken throughout. However, it's a perfect opportunity where we are making those changes to digitalize the process, to automate it and make it more efficient through the software itself. But what we'll then see is we will run the 9-box return in the background. And before we go through the review element, what we'll see here is we have a transaction tab. And this is where the data will be cleansed and it will pull out the transactions that as users, you need to look into in a bit more detail based on those standard data checks. First off, I'll just quickly take a look through to which we'll see we've got some transactions that have occurred after the return period. So where we're working to a June quarter, we've got a certain transaction with the July tax point date entered. Therefore, the software's picked that up, allowing the user now to state whether they wish to mark it as in period or out of period to push through to the next return. So the software is picking it up for you. It's allowing you to apply the relevant treatment that you need to. I've also got a number of transactions that have occurred at unexpected VAT rates. So the software is looking at the VAT element of the transaction, and where it's not seeming to meet a standard reduced or zero rate, again to pick that up. And what we will see is the software will allow you to make manual adjustments at this point for any of those adjustments that may not be able to be automated. Again, you can do that within the software because the digital link is continuously present. And finally, we've got some of the source data that potentially contains duplicated transactions. As we'll see here, it will drill into that, specifically show us those items, to which again, we can apply the relevant treatment and rerun the calculation in the background. Those are the standard data checks that will run within the software. However, the software will allow you to actually input your own data checks. They're the 3 standard data checks that we feel will apply to all organizations. However, we do know there will be certain points that certain industries or certain companies will want to pick up from those. So the software is being built to have the capability to allow users to insert their own criteria for those points to pick up. Again, the main aim there, take it away from having to do that within Excel manually, allow the software to do that, and allow you to only review those that have been picked up by those checks that you've implemented. As mentioned, we can make manual adjustments within the software without breaking the digital link. And the reason why that doesn't break the digital link from HMRC's perspective is, again, within the software, there's a full step-by-step audit trail from where we started with the transaction level file upload, through the mapping to the calculation. Therefore, we can make those manual adjustments if we need to. But as a final point, What we can then do at this point of the 9-box return is we can drill into each box within the return to look at our reviews and, in essence, view that digital link from start to finish. So, for example, if I drilled into my box 1 of the return, what we will see, based on the sales that we've uploaded to, is we can drill into that and actually see the split between the taxable, exempt sales that we've mapped to. So really what this is showing me is from the files that I've uploaded, from the mapping that's been applied in the tax logic within the software, these are the transactions that are being pulled out to populate that box 1 of my VAT return. And with any of these reports, you can export them offline, but they will always remain within the software. So what it's giving you here as a final sense check is the real view from start to finish, how you've got to that 9-box return, and allow you to review that once you've run it here. But once we're happy with that, what we've then got is the final box, which is for diagnostics, which looks at any points that HMRC will pick up when you submit your return. So for example, what we've seen before is where box 1 may exceed 20% of box 6. That's something that prompts HMRC when you submit, so it'll just let you know here and preempt any sort of queries that they may come to and allow you to denote that within the software. But once we're happy with that, what we're then simply doing is saving the template. The template will be handed over to you, so by the time you use the software, that calculation has been automated, it's been run through, and you will then be able to have access. But once we've done that, we're simply ticking off the finalization, using the API links within the software to actually then submit the return through to HMRC. Again, not having to take it offline, allowing you to do that, and that is something that was a requirement, as Kamal alluded to earlier, from phase 1 of MTD that came into play last year. It uses the same APIs to submit through to HMRC, but now what you'll essentially see that's happened is you have automated the process with the digital links. So 1, you are complying, and 2, you've also made the process more efficient where possible. And as a final point that we'll see within the software, where it's got the capabilities to do so, and again, to avoid you having to do any of that offline, is the analytics side. So where you'll see here, we've got a number of record of submissions as the software will just build that up. Rather than you having to maintain something offline or within Excel to look at any sort of trends or jumps in your data, the software will show you all the periods that you've got and allow you to do comparisons between those to first off, get a very high level overview of the 9-box return itself and where there may be any increases between those periods that you're looking at. What it will then do is it will delve into that detail and basically show you what are the reasons for those increases, what's happened this period that didn't happen last period, and allow you to look into those anomalies, do that trend analysis, and really get you a good insight into the business from this perspective as to looking into the detail. So we'll see here, for example, we've got 7 block transactions. We can drill into those, and at this point we'll be able to see who blocked those transactions, which ones they were, and the reason why. So where the data is all kept within the software, it's a perfect opportunity for us to allow the software to give you that insight of the anomalies, to give you that insight of the trend analysis, and again, allow you to using the business tax account that HMRC are using to show you where there's any outstanding payments, any outstanding liabilities, any outstanding reclaims due. But from an overview perspective, as I mentioned from the start, our main aim here is to ensure that you're complying, but it's also a perfect opportunity to look at your process, which we'll do, look at the data that you're exporting, and essentially look into your process and show you how we can automate it, how we can make it more efficient, while we make sure that you are complying with HMRC's compliance requirements. I appreciate that was a very quick tour of the software itself, due to the fact that we do have time restraints. So please do feel free to get in touch if you wish to see a tailored demonstration to your organisation to look at any challenges that you may have. But if anything, that does bring me to the end of the presentation, of which we do open the floor to any questions that you may have, whether it's MTD related, whether it's VAT related, which I'll probably push to Kamal in a bit more detail, or anything from a technology side. So please feel free to use the chat box on the meeting option to input any questions that me and Kamal will be happy to answer. But as I mentioned, if there was anything that you needed in a bit more detail, please feel free to use our contact details and get in touch. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, then we thank you for attending. We thank you for your time, and we hope it was useful, to which, we wish you all the best. However, as I mentioned, Kamal and I will stay on the call with any queries that you may have. So I have received one question on the process of change, and someone has questioned, is it too late to make the changes? And from our perspective, in terms of MTD and looking at, the requirements for what HMRC is saying, and the deferral has moved MTD for phase 2 to April 2021. By all means, it is not too late to make any changes if you do think that you've still got a very manual process. If anything, we'd say now is probably the best time to do that. One, to allow you to get things into play that you need to by the time the deadline hits, but also to future-proof for future things that HMRC do bring into place. So from that, it's far from too late. From our perspective, it's probably the perfect opportunity to do that, for reasons of the deadlines, but also really to look into your processes and be able to look into how we can help you with your process and how we can make sure you're compliant and efficient going forward. Kamal, from your perspective, have you seen maybe a jump in the amount of organisations that may be looking at the current processes and looking to change?
Yes, that is one of the action points, is to look at the processes and to look at what changes could be implemented. I think MTD, and particularly the digital link point, has sort of caught a few organisations because historically there were no specific requirements about how you hold your VAT record. So it's forcing businesses to go back and look at these changes.
I'd probably just echo your thoughts in that it's, again, a perfect opportunity to really, something that's probably been on the radar for a lot of companies in the past few years, but really MTD now driving you to make that change or look into your processes, look where, you may be complying already, but still look to where you can help yourselves as an organisation, give yourself that insight into the business and actually allow you to future-proof yourself going forward. Brilliant. Well, I believe so that is probably the questions that we've received. As I mentioned, if there is anything in a bit more detail, or if there's anything that you had a query on that you may not have been able to get across today, then please feel free to get in touch with myself, or our contact details will be sent out for any sort of queries that you may have, or if you did want to see the demonstration in a bit more detail than the whistle-stop tour that we went through today. Otherwise, I thank you for taking the time out and attending. Kamal, thank you for your bit in hosting and making sure that this goes ahead. Otherwise, I wish you all the best to everyone. And yeah, thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Akhil, and thank you.